Hello, my name is Tatьяna. I'm a lecturer at National Research University Higher School of Economics, and today I'm going to give you a third webinar on the topic of feedback as an important part of assessing our learners' progress in a foreign language classroom. And more specifically, today we're going to focus on written corrective feedback, and we're going to practice different strategies of how to correct linguistic errors in students' writing. Now, some of you might have already seen the previous video about different strategies of written corrective feedback, which aims at correcting linguistic errors in our student writing. And you probably remember some strategies which we talked about. There are 6 strategies, and I would like you to write down in the comment section below the ones that you remember. You remember the strategies that we can use when assessing student writing and correcting their mistakes in their written works. There were 6 strategies, and here they are. Direct and indirect feedback, focused and unfocused, meta-linguistic feedback, and reformulation. Now, 2 of the written corrective strategies that we started off were direct corrective feedback and indirect corrective feedback. I'm sure some of you, especially those who have already watched our previous video, remember them. So will you please think what are the reasons to use each of those, direct corrective feedback and indirect corrective feedback, and what's the difference between these 2 strategies of correcting our learners' errors in their writing? You probably see that the name of the second corrective feedback strategy is actually, has this prefix in, which probably means that this is the opposite of the first written corrective strategy that you can see on my slide. So will you please, so they kind of mean the opposite things, right? They're 2 completely different strategies. So will you please let me know if you remember how to use them and what they actually are. All right, this is direct corrective feedback. This is the example that I showed you in our previous video. The sentence is the erroneous sentence. The sentence with a mistake is, I have bought a new book yesterday. Obviously, there are 2 mistakes which I have detected, right? The first one is in the use of a grammar tense, right? So we should have our student should have written, I bought a new book yesterday, right? Because it's yesterday, there is a time reference to a specific moment in the past. We don't need have because we need past simple, right? And the second mistake is a missing article, a indefinite article before a noun in singular, right? Especially with an adjective. This book is mentioned for the first time, so it should be a new book. As you can see, I myself have corrected all the mistakes and provided my student with all the correct answers. So all that our student has to do is, my student in this case, is just to look through my comments, and that's about it. Not much processing of their mistakes is required, right? Now, I must say that a lot of students actually like this type of error correction because they claim that therefore they're 100% sure how this or that piece of writing, right, sentence should be written in order for it to be correct. So this is a sort of the reference that they can surely rely on, right, when they receive this type of correction. But us as teachers, we understand that sometimes it is a good idea, as many of you mentioned during our previous webinar, is that we sometimes want to get our learners to correct their mistakes themselves, right? Therefore, we give them an extra task to do. Therefore, we ask them to think of their own language and their own strengths and weaknesses, maybe, in a way, and we are therefore developing their learners' autonomy, right, which is really very important. We kind of teach them to be independent learners. So if we do want to get our learners to correct their mistakes themselves, we might use the other error correction strategies out of these two, which is indirect corrective feedback. So as you can see, the very same sentence, I have bought new book yesterday, the very same mistakes, but I corrected them differently. Actually, I didn't correct these mistakes. I just let my student know that there are two mistakes. Now, I used two different ways of doing it. I put a little tick to let my student know that there is a word missing, and my student will have to think on their own what type of word is missing, right? Probably they will guess that this is an article if they have enough knowledge, and I've underlined the verb form, so I think that's pretty clear for them that there is a problem with the tense. Right? Now, what is so important about using this type of error correction? The most important thing is that when I do turn to indirect corrective feedback, I must be sure that my learners are able to correct these mistakes on their own, right? There is no point in underlining bits of texts in our students' writing if we're pretty sure or we assume that they might have no clue about what's wrong. And very often when teachers do use these symbols, though I cannot refer to that as indirect feedback, many teachers just think that actually correcting mistakes takes a lot of time, so they will just underline some bits of texts and that will about it. But very often learners don't even know what it means, whether it's good, whether it's not. So we use indirect feedback only for reason, only when we want our learners to correct these specific mistakes on their own. And another important thing to bear in mind here is that when we do turn to indirect corrective feedback, therefore we do give our student an extra task to think what their mistakes are, to find them on their own, especially if we don't give many clues. Here I've given quite a lot of clues, right? I've underlined the verb tense, I've put a tick to let our student know that there is a word missing, but I can actually make this task even a bit more complex, right? For my learner, I may just put 2 ticks or 2 dots in the margin next to the line to let our student know that there are 2 mistakes. I'm not telling you what kind of mistakes these are. Find them yourself and correct them. Then I might think that this will be a bit too hard for them, right? So I can make it again a bit easier, not as easy as the way I showed it here, but a bit easier than just letting our student know there are 2 mistakes over here, I can say there are 2 mistakes in this line. One of them is in the use of a verb tense, and the other is in the use of an article. So find them please on your own and let me know. A very important bit of providing, like an integral part of providing indirect corrective feedback to our learners is making sure that we find time, any time after we've given them back their papers, to actually go back to the very same piece of writing and make sure that our learners were able to find mistakes and were able to correct them correctly. So this is very important. There are other 2 types of written corrective feedback which you might have already heard of and which we touched upon in our previous video, and these are focused corrective feedback and unfocused corrective feedback. Now I'll give you 30 seconds to try to think what the difference between these 2 types of feedback might be: focused corrective feedback and unfocused corrective feedback. Now you can probably understand that again they are linked because the letter has this prefix, right, which means the opposite from the former, probably, so they're quite the opposite, right? Focused corrective feedback. Why is it focused? So when using this feedback, we're probably focusing on something. Is the sound okay? We're probably focusing on something, right? And we might also have unfocused corrective feedback, right? When we are actually not focusing on anything. All right, thank you. So, yeah, have a look at the example here. I have bought a new book yesterday. I did not buy the new pens yet. I didn't start read a book I bought yesterday. I will do it tomorrow. So obviously this is the text written by our learner. And there are a lot of mistakes in this text, right? And will you please have a close look at the way I corrected mistakes over here? Did I correct all the mistakes that are here, or did I actually miss some of them? So I corrected obviously only some of the mistakes that our learner made when producing this piece of writing, and I must admit that I didn't miss some of them. I skipped them. I did it on purpose, right? So I actually focused on something, right, when correcting a mistake over here. And what did I focus on? I focused on the way our learner used the verbs in this piece of writing, right? On the verb use, and more specifically on the use of 2 tenses. And these tenses are past simple and present perfect. Now I ignored all the other mistakes. I focused only on the use of present perfect and past simple, right? So I bought new book yesterday, didn't do anything over here. I have bought the new pens. I have not bought the new pens yet. I haven't started read book I bought yesterday. I will do it tomorrow. Now, I did it on purpose, and I have already had a little conversation with some of our viewers, and some teachers really voiced their concerns about not correcting all mistakes in our student writing. Now, obviously, we do not turn to this type of error correction all the time. We do it only for reason, and one of the representative examples of when it might be a good idea to use this strategy to correct our learners' mistake is when we have just started a specific topic, right? A specific grammar rule, right? And I gave my learner a task to actually practice it, right? I gave my learners a written task to practice this particular grammar pattern in writing. Obviously, if it's more of a free practice, right, my learners might actually make many more mistakes than the mistakes in the use of these two tenses, but I do not want to detract their attention from the use of my target language, right? So I decide to focus only on these bits, right? And yeah, obviously, if, for example, we are preparing our learner for a state exam, right? Or if we are doing just revision at the end of the year, right? We might actually turn to, well, not choose this error correction strategy and actually correct all the mistakes that our learner has made, just to let them know where they are at the moment. But when we are focusing on a specific topic, for example, right, or we want to highlight the way they use our target language, we might turn to this error correction strategy. For example, in many textbooks that are popular and widely used nowadays, including Forward, you can find a number of different writing tasks, right, for formative assessment, just to help our learners to work on their productive skills, on their written skills, especially after covering different topics. So when doing it with your learners, you might sometimes choose to focus on specific aspects of their task completion, right, and not on everything. And what important here is that, well, obviously, you can focus on, you can choose different colors, right? You can still use focused corrective feedback, or for example, focused, is it direct or indirect corrective feedback over here? Well, it's focused direct corrective feedback because obviously I correct the mistakes, right? I don't just highlight them, I actually provide our learners with the way they should have written these verbs, right? So this is focused direct corrective feedback, but I might also choose indirect corrective feedback to correct some other types of mistakes, and therefore my feedback will still be focused because, well, let's say I chose this color of the pen and these other strategy to correct these mistakes, and then I can choose another color of the pen and, let's say, indirect corrective feedback and focus on some other types of mistakes, right? Okay, so obviously this is an example of unfocused corrective feedback when I correct pretty much everything. And just looking by this slide, you can see clearly another reason why it can be a good idea to go for focused corrective feedback, because obviously, well, this short piece of writing consists of only 2 lines. And isn't there too much red color over there, right? I think that might actually seem a bit demotivating, right? Well, this one is not too bad, but sometimes it can even be worse. So if we correct every single mistake, or sometimes teachers tend to overcorrect, which means they correct not only every single mistake, but they might also correct something that can actually be accepted, that can be considered as, well, the right way of formulating our students' idea. So we might omit some mistakes, especially if they are errors. Which means if this is something our student just simply hasn't covered yet, and this is not a crucial mistake to be corrected right now, right? But obviously here all mistakes are pretty major, right? So I think it's a good idea to correct all of them. Obviously I use this example just to illustrate the way you can use this strategy like technically, right? Here we have, I bought a new book yesterday, right? Because this is just one book, not mentioned before. We need indefinite article. I have not bought new pens yet. Why do we need this definite article the? We haven't mentioned these pens yet. Then I haven't started, and after started we need gerund, right? Started reading the book because I have already mentioned this book, right? The book I bought yesterday, I will do it tomorrow. There is a spelling mistake, right? In the word tomorrow, we write 2 R's, right? Okay. Another strategy is reformulation, and as you can see here, reformulation is basically when we introduce a more natural way of saying pretty much the same thing to our learner. A good way to use reformulation, well, a good reason to use reformulation is when our learner has made quite a lot of mistakes in one line or in one sentence, and there is just too much correction going on, so it can't actually be not understandable, right? All our signs and symbols, all our corrections, it might be actually hard for our student to learn, to understand what we meant, right? And you remember that all that we write on their papers is actually for them. This is something that we should always bear in mind. All the symbols that we use, all the marking strategies that we use are for our learners, not for us, for them, because they stay with them, right? Obviously, I'm talking right now about formative assessment that we use in the process of teaching, not summative assessment, which means a final test at the end of the term, at the end of the unit, or at the end of a semester, right? So another reason why the reformulation can be used is when there are mistakes with syntaxes, for example, sentence structure, or when there are mistakes with when what our student has learned is just not English. It's just not a natural way of putting whatever they meant, right? So by using this error correction strategy, we can actually introduce a more natural way of saying what our student meant, right? I urge you that we do not overuse this error correction strategy, because there is a high risk that we start, as teachers say, appropriating our students' text, which means actually not helping them to formulate their ideas using more natural language, but actually when reformulating their text and their sentences, there is a high risk that we start actually changing their ideas, and this is something that we should really stay away from. And obviously it's not a good idea to rewrite our students' text completely, right? It's much better to just give them a little push to formulate what they meant themselves, to correct what they have already written themselves, right? But you can sometimes turn to this strategy, especially if there are syntactic errors or errors in the language use. And my last strategy for today is metalinguistic corrective feedback. As you can see, it consists of 2 parts which can be used independently or which can be used all together. What are those little symbols in those bubbles? What do you call those, and why do I use them? Why did I use them when marking this student's piece of writing? Little T, little V, little art, little SP in those circles. What do they mean? What's that? What do they stand for? Well, obviously those are often referred to as error codes. Those are a little abbreviation which stand for different types of mistakes, and do we use them for us or do they use them for our learners? Well, the right answer is actually for both. We can, if we do use those symbols, it is a good way for us to see what are the most like sort of problematic areas, right? You don't, if you like go over the stack of your student papers again, it's just easier for you to say, okay, there are really a lot of grammar mistakes in pretty much all the papers, right? Or you can, instead of actually reading carefully every single one. And also you let your student know what their problem areas are, right? So the more specific you are when introducing error codes, the better. For example, as you can see, I have here R, which stands for, what do you think it stands for? Well, it stands for a mistake in the use of an article, right? I have a T. So what is T? T is a mistake in the use of a verb tense. I have V, which is the, well, verb or the verb use. I have a SP, which is spelling. So incorrect way of, well, writing a word, right? So I could actually, except for spelling, I could actually label all those mistakes as G or GR, which is grammar. Will that be correct? Of course, well, it will, because all of them are grammar. Verb use is grammar, the use of verb tenses is grammar, the use of articles is grammar, but is it specific? Is it helpful? It's not really helpful, right? Because, well, everybody knows that there is something for, like, in grammar for them to work on, right? So the more specific we are, like what in particular should you focus on when working on your grammar, the more helpful our marking is, right? I would say that even with T, it can be a bit more specific. Instead of writing tense, you can actually specify what tense is misused, or like what tense should be used if you consider it to be important for a particular piece of writing, right? And what can you see here down below under that the marked student piece of writing? We use past simple when there is a time reference to a specific moment in the past. For example, yesterday. What's that? Well, it's my little metalinguistic comment, which is an explicit explanation of the grammar rule on which a mistake has been made, sorry, and yeah, this is another way and like another bit or another kind of strategy under that term metalinguistic error corrective feedback, right? Obviously, this is one of the most favorite error correction strategies for a lot of learners, as research says, and one of the least favorite error correction strategies for a lot of teachers. Do you have any ideas why? Well, probably because it takes a lot of time to actually write grammar rules and it requires sound grammar knowledge, right? So in order to write a nice metalinguistic comment, it is a good idea to go and check, right? Well, your knowledge, your understanding of how to use this or that grammar pattern, which is always a good idea, by the way. The more you check, even if you think you're sure, the better. Like, seriously, you'll find out so many exciting things about the English language if you start doing that. So basically, metalinguistic feedback is the feedback which implies giving some linguistic information to our learners about their mistakes. Now, do you think metalinguistic feedback is it is a good idea to use metalinguistic feedback when working with young learners, for example, with primary school students? Do you think it can be reasonable? I doubt that, because they're not like conscious learners yet, right? And it can actually be irrelevant. But when it comes to working with adults or with teenagers or with those students whom you prepare for a final exam, right? For the written part, right? You can, for written part of your state exam, you can definitely use this type of error correction feedback, just for them, again, to let them know where they are and what are like the areas that should focus on more. And Victor says that all students must be aware of what our codes actually mean, and I cannot agree more. I gave you an example in my previous video about me teaching for the first time in my life. That was my first year of teaching English, and I used a bunch of different symbols. I was so excited. I felt like it looked so professional when I was marking my students' writing. And it was only at the end of the year when I realized that my learners had no clue what those symbols meant. They thought I was doing it for myself, but obviously, well, back then I think I was, but it's not a good approach to take, right? They are for our learners. Error codes. By the way, right, as for the error codes, you can use different error codes. You can come up with your own system of codes and just make sure that you share this code with your learners. You're on the same page, right? But these are one of the most, well, these are not one, but like 10 most common ones. They're among the most common error codes. For example, when there is an extra word, you can just put 2 crosses on both sides of this word, right? If you don't want to actually cross the word, which a lot of teachers believe is not a good idea. It's like very intrusive, but I actually cross the word sometimes. Don't think it's a problem, right? You can put a little tick upwards or downwards, right? If you want to indicate a missing word, you can put a little T to let your student know that there is a mistake in the use of a verb tense, or you can actually specify what in particular, like what tenses are misused in particular, right? You can write wrong word if there is a wrong word written instead of the one that should have been written. Word order, when there is a mistake with the word order, right? Article, verb use, P for punctuation. But again, actually there are a lot of mistakes that can be labeled as P. For example, punctuation, pronoun, or a preposition. So just choose one to label as P, and you can label others with prep or pron, or PUs and C for punctuation if you decide to use P for something else. But just make sure that you stick to the code that you've chosen, at least by the till the end of the year, or till throughout until you stop teaching this or that group of learners, because if you start labeling different mistakes, for example, mistakes in the use of a preposition, of a pronoun, or of a punctuation mistake as P, that will be confusing, right, and not helpful. Now C it stands for capitalization. And that can actually, some actually teachers, because technically capitalization is considered to be a punctuation mistake, so you can mark it as P, or again you can be a bit more specific and mark it as as C, right? Capitalizations, when we capitalize, write with the uppercase letter a word that shouldn't be written with the uppercase, right? Or when you actually write with a lowercase, with a small letter, the word that should be capitalized. For example, a proper name, right? A name of a city, Moscow, with a small m is a capitalization mistake. Prep is a mistake in the use of prepositions as prepositional, as I have already said, as p spelling or misspelling, right? The wrong way of writing this or that word when there is a letter missing or one extra letter written, right? And fragmentation. Now, not all teachers and learners are familiar with this type of mistake, but this is a variation of a syntactic mistake when we divide a sentence unnecessarily into two sentences. For example, I decided to stay home, period, because I was ill, as a new sentence. I decided to stay home, full stop, because I was ill, another sentence. Obviously, there is no reason to break the sentence here into two parts. This is not English, so we can like mark it as fragmentation. You can put F or you can put frag, right, which means unnecessary fragmentation of a sentence into several fragments, right? Okay, and I think, again, you can use all those error codes when teaching writing to your learners, and there are a lot of tasks in written tasks in the forward textbook, in particular tasks that prepare our learners for state exams, right? ÖGE at lower level and YGE in the 10th and 11th grade, and obviously using error codes can be a good idea just because we want to let our learners again know where they are at the moment, right? Now I actually want to do a task with you, right? So I think enough theory for now. Time to do some to practice all the strategies that we have acquired so far. So I guess I will explain it to you now, and then I will give you maybe 3 minutes to do this task on your own. I will not distract you and bother you because this is actually a game. This game is called Risk It. It's, or in other words, error correction gambling. So here you have 7 sentences. Each of them has a mistake in it, a language mistake. Now I've done the first one for you as an example. Let's go on the concert this Saturday. Obviously there is a preposition which is misused. So I've detected a mistake. I've underlined it, but you're going to do it from the screen, so you don't have to underline. You have just to take a note. You can just run down the wrong part of a write down the wrong part of a sentence. I have labeled it with an error code. Obviously, it's a preposition, right? It should be "Let's go to the concert." I wrote an appropriate error code, which is prep, which stands for preposition in my error code. And I, have a look at this very important right column. Here, you need to, on the scale from 1 to 5, you need to evaluate how sure you are about you having detected a mistake and chosen a proper error code. So if you're really sure, honestly, I was sure. I actually turned to the dictionary and checked. I didn't, but I mean, that's a very easy error to detect, but you should always kind of like make effort and get bothered and check in the dictionary if it's something that you think is correct, because again, that helps a lot. So I was quite sure and I wrote 5. If I'm not quite sure, I can write, let's say 3. I can write 4 if I'm more or less sure, not 100%, but maybe like 80% or 90%, I can write 4. 5 is like 100% sure. If I am not quite sure, I can write 2. And if I'm not sure at all, I can write 1. And you can't write 0. So if you're not sure at all, you will write 1, okay? It's very important. It's very important. It's a very important column to fill in. So I would like you to take out some sheets of paper, put numbers from 1 to, well, the first has been done for you. From 2 to 7, just like that. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. To actually write down an error code and the number, how sure you are, from 1 to 5, okay? Error code and the number, okay? Will you please do it for me? You will have about 3 minutes to do this task, okay? You remember an error code, you detect a mistake, you can actually write down the bit of a sentence where there is a mistake, but it's most important that you write an error code, and the most important bit is that you write how sure you are on the scale from 1 to 5. Now, can you write 0 there? No, you can't. If you're not sure, you will write 1. We'll give you 3 minutes to do this task, and I'll be right back and we'll check together. right, I can see that some of you have already started writing answers into the chat. So let's check it together. So the second, well, we have already discussed the first sentence, right? Let's have a look at the second one. She was upset, but I didn't want to talk to her, right? Now, again, this is that mistake that I have actually mentioned, right? Already. So she was upset, but I didn't want to talk to her. When there is, this is just a simple, like a clause with the conjunction, but there is no need to break this sentence into several sentences. So it should be, she was upset, but I didn't want to talk to her, written in one sentence, and the mistake is fragmentation, right? The third one, do you know what does Anne want for her birthday? So obviously this is an indirect question. It is particularly important if you are preparing your learners for a state exam, right? And in the letter they are to ask 3 questions. Some, if you do really want, if your learners do really want to show the assessor, the rater, that they can use all sorts of different questioning strategies, including an indirect question, it is very important that they actually use, this questioning technique appropriately and do not make mistakes in the word order. In indirect questions, there should be a direct word order, right? So it should be Anne wants for her birthday. Do you know what Anne wants for her birthday? What does Anne want for her birthday? Do you know what Anne wants for her birthday? So this is word order, right? Number 4, this job is not as easy as it may appear. Now, there is a spelling mistake in the word appear, should be double P, so it's spelling. Number 5, it's not good to go to the bed late. To go to bed, it's like an expression. We do not actually use an article here, right? So it should be, there is a mistake in the use of an article. It's not good to go to bed late. Article, the use of an article. Number 6, there is no place for another bag in the car. It's a wrong word. There is no room for another bag in the car, right? So it's a wrong word, should have been marked as WW. And then when I came home, Sean already left. It's the mistake in the use of a tense, it's reported speech. So it should be when I came, it's not reported speech, sorry, it's just the use of a tense, sequence of tenses, as some of you have written absolutely correctly. So when I came home, Sean had already left. Now, I want you to do the following. I want you now to have a look at these numbers which you wrote in the left column, like your bits, right? It can be 5, 4, 3, 4, 3, 5, 5, 5. And I want you to count your points right now. For every sentence that you got absolutely correctly, you add the number of points written in the same line. For example, the first sentence, I got it correctly, so I would just add 5 to my final score. And then if there is a sentence in which you made a mistake, you didn't quite get it right, you will take the number of points which you wrote in the left column. So let it be, for example, I was not sure in that fragmentation bit in the second sentence. Let's imagine I just wrote 2 and I made mistake. I didn't detect this mistake and I didn't use a proper error code for that. And I wrote 2 because I was not really quite sure. So I will take this number of points off from my final score. So, and you do it with all the 6 sentences and you count your final score, okay? So I can, so And you give us your final score in the comment section, okay? It can be 28, it can be 40, no, the maximum is 6, so 30 probably will be your maximum, right? But it can be, let's say, any number, can actually be a negative number. Just let us know what your final score is if you are willing to share. So I have some questions here. Why appear in the fourth sentence? The job is not as easy as it may appear. Now you can use the verb to appear in the meaning to seem. This is one of the meanings of the verb to appear. This job is not easy as it may seem, as it may appear. Yeah, so I think that is actually okay. So we have 23, 25, 24. Amazing! You did a great job. Thank you so much. Did you like the game? Let us know in the comment section too, please. Now, you keep calculating your points and I'm keeping track of that, okay? Now, we're going to do actually a real practice exercise right now. Have a look. This is a real piece of writing. That is my student. He gave me a consent, so he gave me permission to use his paragraph from his written work. And he has made quite a few mistakes. It was several years ago. In this bit of writing, his grandparents are from St. Petersburg, so he just wrote me a little message about his about the city. But now I would like you to use corrective feedback, direct corrective feedback, focused on the use of articles and prepositions. Now, obviously, again, this is, you're going to do it from the screen, so I will just give you a couple of minutes to read this text and try to detect the mistakes on the use of articles or the problems with the use of articles and prepositions in this piece of writing. And because this is direct corrective feedback, you are to actually correct them, to provide this student with the correct way of writing that bit. Now, because this is a focused feedback, are we correcting any other mistakes? No. This task, this is an exercise for language learners, and I would like you to oh, not for language learners, this is an exercise for teachers. Sorry, I'm reading your comments, so interesting. Just your scores, that's why I get a bit distracted sometimes. Yeah, so you try to think what the mistakes are, right? This is focused feedback, this is direct focused feedback. This is just an exercise for us to train that skill to be selective when marking student writing. Now, another tip is that don't show other teachers that you know yet. We're going to discuss it very quickly in a couple minutes time, right? Don't give out your answers yet, but I can see you're doing great. Thank you so much. Now, I will give you 3 minutes to focus on the mistakes in the use of article and prepositions in this piece of writing, okay? 3 minutes to read this text and think of the mistakes, okay? All right, I could see that some of you have already detected many mistakes, but again, we are focusing on the mistakes only in the use of articles and prepositions. There are some other mistakes, we're not focusing on them. We're using direct corrective feedback to correct the mistakes in prepositions and articles. Now, actually, research shows that direct corrective feedback, especially focused direct corrective feedback, is one of the most effective strategies to correct mistakes in the use of articles, because this is the, especially because in the Russian language we do not have articles, this is one of the very few ways of how to show our learners how articles are used, only by showing them directly over and over again how articles should be used, and therefore help them develop that inner feeling for articles. Well, this is what research says, particularly when it comes to articles. That's why we're focusing on articles and prepositions right now. Now, I have this text right in front of me right now, and let's have a look what you have, what you suggest correcting. Well, St. Petersburg is, an article is missing, right? Is the most beautiful city. Please pay attention at the fact that I'm not using a red pen, because you told me during our previous seminars that this is not a good idea to use red pen. That can look a bit too aggressive and a bit too overwhelming for our learners, and I do agree with you, so I've chosen another color, right? So I was born in St. Petersburg, and my grandmother and my grandfather live there. When I visit St. Petersburg, I go to see, and a lot of you have detected this mistake. I go to see. Actually, with rivers, we usually use the article, and I checked it myself this morning again, because articles is something that should always be checked. I went to the Grammarly website. They have quite a good article about the use of articles with proper names. And so with rivers, there should be a definite article, the. Okay, it's okay. You're not late for the answers. We're actually doing it together right now, so stay tuned, right? The Neva River for a walk in the Nevsky Prospect, right, or avenue. Now, go for a walk. When we say in the Nevsky Prospect, it might actually mean that, well, it's in the middle of the street, and I actually doubt that my student walks right in the middle of the Nevsky Prospect, because that's actually very dangerous. I think if he tried doing it a couple of times, there's a high chance I wouldn't see him ever again, right? Because this is really very dangerous. When we talk about streets, I'm focusing on prepositions too, right? We can use some other prepositions which would look and sound more natural. For example, I was walking down the street, right? Or along the street. And as many of you, not many, but for example, Viktor Petrov or Olga Hakhalova actually suggest that we should also correct Nevsky Prospect, because there shouldn't be a definite article, and that's true. It's the name of a street, but don't use definite articles with names of streets. I have checked it just in case this morning too. So with my friends, or visit in the Petrogov. Obviously, we do not need this preposition in over here, right? We just visit something. We visit something. No preposition. It can be even a little metalinguistic comment for our learner, right? Just so he knows. And we do not, again, pedagog is a proper name. We do not need the here, right? So we cross it out too. I enjoy to stay in the street at night. Now again, is this a mistake? This is actually a mistake. We shouldn't write I enjoy, our students shouldn't have written I enjoy to stay. I enjoy plus a gerund, but are we correcting it right now? No, the exercise given the exercise, right? Given the instructions for this exercise, we are focused only on the use of articles and prepositions. So right now, for now, we stay away in the street at night, because every night 8 of the bridges open and make a picturesque view. My favorite is the Anichkov Bridge. Now, I also checked it this morning. With bridges, it actually depends. Some bridges are used with no article, for example, Tower Bridge or Westminster Bridge. Some bridges are used with articles, for example, the Golden Gate Bridge. I tried to Google whether we should use the bridge, like this particular bridge, Anichkov Bridge, with an article or not, and different websites give different answers. So some of them write this bridge with an article, some of them write it without an article, like the Anichkov Bridge or Anichkov Bridge. Now, if we are in this situation, do we cross this "the" out if actually the way our student wrote can be accepted and is actually accepted and is actually, this is how it is written on some English language websites? No, we don't. We don't want to overcorrect, right? But we want our learner to know, so be careful, right? Some bridges are not used with an article. Are you sure this bridge is used with an article? Because it depends. But yeah. The bridge was decorated by sculptures. Was the bridge decorated by sculptures, or was it decorated with sculptures? So we usually, when we use something to perform an action, right, we rather say with. On the theme, taming of wild horses. Now, on the theme, it sounds very Russian. This is how we would say. But in English, they would say under the theme. But that can be quite tricky. And we'll see what the general level of our student is. I'm pretty sure that this student would actually be able to say under the theme of if I let him know, so we can write under the theme of, right? During, and many of you actually Anichkov, but this is a bridge, for example, the George Washington Bridge, right? Again, it's a proper name, but it's still the George Washington Bridge. So with bridges, we should be very careful. During the Second World War, right, the sculptures were put away and saved so we can admire them now. Now, we have completed the task which I asked you to complete, so you can see all the corrections on the slide too. We completed the task which was given to us a couple of minutes ago. But now again, some of you last time voiced concerns that what if there are some other important mistakes? What if our learner never finds out that they actually misuse those bits of, those kind of language patterns, right? That language, of which they made some other mistakes. Yes, that might actually, now we always need to think. So if I really want my student right now to focus on articles and prepositions, maybe that was actually the focus of my task. Maybe I gave him this task just because I wanted him to actually think a lot of how to use articles and prepositions with different proper names, right? But yeah, therefore I can just leave it like that because I want him to work on what is in here. I use direct corrective feedback, right? But I might actually also and this is focused feedback, right? I might actually also let my student know that there are a couple of other mistakes, right? And if we used a blue color to focus on these two types of mistakes, for example, articles and prepositions, let's use another color and indirect corrective feedback at this stage to mark some other mistakes, right? So I could see that some of you mentioned that there is a mistake with the verb use, right? I enjoy to stay in the street at night, right? Now this is an indirect feedback. I know that unlike articles and prepositions, which are quite problematic areas for my learner, I know that here I would like to, other mistakes can actually be corrected by himself, right? So let's use indirect corrective feedback. I might just underline that bit. If I want to help him a bit more, I can write like verb use, right? A little code, so he can correct it himself, right? Now, in the street at night, is it a natural way of putting it? I enjoy to stay in the street at night. I think this is not quite what he meant. Looks like he meant like outside or outdoors. This is just a direct translation from the Russian language, but in English they would say outside or outdoors. So we can just ask him to paraphrase. Some teachers might write not English with a little exclamation mark, which sounds a bit too rude. But let's see, again, when I give my learner a task to to correct their mistakes themselves, I am to go back to this piece of writing and check how successful they are. Let's see if they can do it. We'll go back to him after he corrects these mistakes himself and check. Then we'll just help him and say, should have been outside or outdoors, right? So because every night 8 of the bridges open make a very picturesque view, my favorite is the Anichkov bridge. The bridge was decorated with sculptures under the theme taming of wild horses. During the Second World War, the sculptures were put away and saved. Now, will you please tell me what kind of mistake that is? We have already seen it a couple of times today. Obviously, this is fragmentation, right? Unnecessary division of a sentence into several sentences. We can label it as fragmentation. So this is pretty much direct and indirect corrective feedback, focused and unfocused in action. This is pretty much what it looks like, right? The mixture of different error correction strategies. Now, I think we have some time to do another task, which is this one. I will ask you to use, have a look at this piece of writing. What does it look like? It actually looks like a state exam, языке letter, right? Because we can see there are 3 questions. Now we're not going, fragmentation, very good. We're not going to look at the task for this letter. We're not focusing on content right now, but we will in our further videos. Right now we're only going to focus on the language, and here you're asked to use unfocused, which means you're detecting all the mistakes you can see, indirect written corrective feedback. And the way I want you to do that is actually to mark those mistakes with air codes, but I want you to do it in the way that is a bit less helpful for a learner. I want you to You see that the lines in this letter are numbered, right? From 1 to 10. So I want you to write down numbers from 1 to 10 in your notes. And when looking through this piece of writing, I want you to write down air codes next to each line, the air codes of all the mistakes that you were able to detect. Now, this is a great way for our learner to let them know. Now, in this line, there is one mistake in the use of a verb tense, one spelling mistake, and one preposition which is misused. So, will you please correct, like find these mistakes themselves and correct them. All right. I will give you. So you will just number your the lines in your notes and write error codes. There can be more than one mistake in each line. So you'll just write error codes with the comma. Some lines are absolutely correct, right? And we will discuss it in a 3 minutes time. All right, so I could see that a lot of you have already written your answers over here, right? So let's see if we are on the same page, shall we? So, dear Carol, thanks so much for your letter. It's great to hear from you again. I'm sorry, period. I didn't write you for so long. Now, a lot of you have already mentioned, right, have already stated, for example, Oksana, Anna, that there is a problem, like there is a mistake with fragmentation, right, in our, in the first line, right? So, there shouldn't be that full stop over here, right? I'm sorry, and then there is also a mistake with the tense, right? Let me actually highlight here for us to see, right? I haven't written, right, earlier or for so long, because it's not, there is no reference to a specific moment in the past. It is just for our learners. It started sometime in the past and it is still valid now, right? Then you can say I haven't written for so long, but our learner decided to use that pronoun here, you. But if we use a pronoun you, then we should also use a preposition to. I haven't written for so long, but I haven't written to you for so long, right? So there is a preposition missing. These past few weeks, and this is again tense, right? They actually have been crazy because I am, and there is a spelling mistake, right? Studying for the exam, that I, and then it's again tense, that I will sit next week. You can sit exams. This is one of the verbs. You can take exams, which is more useful for us. You can also use the verb to sit. But the tense might be labeled as wrong here because our student probably knows, Lera probably knows already very well in advance that her exam is next week. It is scheduled for next week. So you can say I have an exam, right, next week, using present simple for something that is scheduled. Or you can say I'm sitting an exam or I'm taking an exam next week because Lera already knows, all her fellow students already know about it too. They have already probably printed their exam papers, right? And everybody is preparing, their teachers are preparing to give them exams. So it should be present continuous for fixed plans in the future. When we say, I will sit in an exam next week, we usually use will to refer to the future when we're not really sure if it will actually happen or not. For example, I'm so tired right now, you know what? I'll just go home right now because I have made this decision right now, just now, right? So it's tense as well. What about your questions? And this is a very common problem, right? What do you label this one? Well, this is actually a conjunction. We can label it as a conjunction. Your question, I'm in favor of documentary films about animals. They make us to be aware. Now, we know that there is no to after make, right? They make us be aware. Sorry, I've just made a mistake myself. I started crossing things out and I'm using direct corrective feedback. We'll just probably underline it or maybe even leave it alone, but just label it as with an error code, right? Verb use, be aware. And the problem here is with the pronoun to be aware of something, with a preposition, sorry, to be aware of something. So there is also a problem with the preposition. Now, wildlife in this context should be spelled in one word. This is a spelling mistake. Problems. I think people can take care of endangered species by saving national parks. By the way, something is missing here, right? It's a linking word. We need a comma, so it's punctuation. They hunt on these animals, and this is a pronoun, right? Must be forbidden. I'm keen on bears because they're wonderful and clever. Tell me about a fancy dress ball. Have you chosen a costume? What color it is? Now, what problem is here? This is a mistake in the word order, right? Word order. How often do you have such balls at school? I'm sorry, but I have to go now. Right back soon, yours, Lera. Now, I can see that Oksana, for example, suggests that we should say I have been studying. This is also, I would also go with I have been studying. This is probably, in terms of the tense, something that because probably Lara started studying some time ago and she's still studying, but I would accept present continuous here too. Maybe she just means at the moment I'm studying so hard, like I'm studying here. I started studying a bit some time ago. I will continue studying at the moment. Now I'm sitting on a chair and in a chair, and Lera, I'm sitting at the desk, I'm talking to you, and Lera is probably right now studying for exams, right? Or this period of time she is actually studying hard for the exams, so I would accept this one too. Even if I feel that present perfect continuous can be a better, I would personally use present perfect continuous here. I wouldn't correct it as wrong, mark it as wrong, because I just don't want to overcorrect, and this is how it can look. If you want to make it a bit more challenging for Yolana, or you can actually let Yolana know where in particular the mistakes are. So this is a bit easier than this for Yolana, and you decide on your own what. Definitely costume, spelling mistake. Thank you so much. You can decide on your own what mistake to, what type of indirect corrective feedback to choose. Costume, definitely spelling. Thank you so much. Yelena and Oksana. All right. So these were some error correction strategies. We tried to use them when working with real pieces of writing of our learners, and I hope this video was useful to you. I will see you soon. Thank you so much. I'm waiting for your feedback in the comment section.